Securing the modern enterprise requires insights into massive amounts of data. NVIDIA Morpheus harnesses the power of AI and GPU computing to help protect networks in a way never before possible, enabling 100% data visibility to provide cybersecurity analysts the tools to identify, capture, and act on threats and anomalies. Sign up for a free 1-hour NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute course. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/NVIDIA. Contrast Security secures the code that global business relies on. It is the industry's most modern and comprehensive code security platform, removing security roadblock inefficiencies and empowering enterprise developers to write and release secure application code faster. The Contrast platform automatically detects vulnerabilities while developers write code, eliminates false positives, and provides how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast vulnerability remediation. Learn more about the Contrast platform at securityweekly.com/contrast security. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Janet Worthington from Forrester Research about how and why we need to improve AppSec education throughout universities. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella and Tyler Robinson, and it's just about time for the news. But first, don't forget to check our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. It's great for any university course out there. And if you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of these shows, submit that suggestion to securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly, and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. And gentlemen, this brings us to quite a few security articles this week, so going to have to run through them quickly. I had one that was real quick about the LastPass breach that they just updated their announcement about it, and really there was one thing that I'll just beat the drum of. The threat actor gained access to a development environment through a compromised developer endpoint, which just drives home that we know MFA everywhere, preferably FIDO keys, but that's the boring repetition part. One of the things, though, and this is more of a, call it a pre-mortem, if you will, or maybe a tabletop exercise for your own organizations. In the LastPass write-up, they talk about, we've looked at our code, we've checked the integrity, we have high confidence that the integrity of our source wasn't affected, and we have good compartmentalization or good security isolation between our production systems and our data. So you need to have access to these particular secrets in order to get access to sensitive data in prod, which I'm not being facetious in any way about or sarcastic. These are good design approaches. The catch always is, how do you have confidence in your design, and how do you communicate that confidence that people will believe you? So perhaps that's my my tabletop exercise for the week. Not sure if that if there's anything else you guys want to add to that, or if we should roll forward into more of these fun vulns.
Trust me, baby, I love you.
Yeah, I mean, really, you can't iterate this enough. Like, let's get past this password stuff and get to some password lists with some FIDO keys, and stop all the mayhem, especially with developers. They're better than admins, honestly.
And that's why, slight digression. That's why I love things like WebAuthn. So to geek out on protocols very slightly, you could leak a WebAuthn secret or identifier, and the world will not collapse. We don't need a have I been pwned, because there's also some cryptographic pinning to the domain that you're you're authenticating to. So there's a lot of ways that the protocol itself helps prevent users from shooting themselves in the foot, to start using some very gruesome metaphors for Halloween as we build up to it, but making those mistakes. So there's a lot of other reasons why it is phishing resistant. Speaking of phishing resistant and passwords, I'll use that as a segue to Twitter discloses it wasn't logging users out of accounts after password resets. This one for me was more about just a chance to talk about there is more to do when we talk about passwords and authentication. There is indeed more than just FIDO keys. You do have to talk about password recovery, password resets. Well, if you do a password reset, because if someone thinks that their account was compromised, you should probably revoke all of those OAuth grants as well. So there's a lot of subtleties to authentication that should be part of your threat model. So that's one of the aspects I wanted to highlight there. So I don't know if this is one of those things. I see John is just nodding his head. Not sure if I can get a t-shirt slogan like, "Oh, Mike is right once again," or if there's something else you need to answer.
I'm holding on to that one for a little longer.
I knew that
feel
was
like
gonna be
this
the
particular
case.
horse has been beaten pretty well. So
Yeah. I've got another horse that's been beaten to death to add to our gruesome Halloween theme, but we'll save that for a little bit. Let's jump to something that a few of the things that you were looking at, John. Going to go into Web3 and the blockchain. You've got some protocol areas though, so I did perk up. Help us about some of these flaws you found.
So I'm it's not even a flaw. I'm looking forward. We've got our one of our crypto residences here with us today. So I want to see what Tyler has to say. So this landed on my radar from TechCrunch. A Web3 bug bounty company raised their Series A, Immunify. So the core question from me is there something unique or different in the Web3 space, whether that's crypto coins or NFTs, what have you, that you need to have a separate bug bounty system?
I would say yes.
Oh, okay.
And here's why. At first I was 100% no, like run it through the same bug bounty, get the same people, get people looking at it. However, because I would say the attraction to Web3, NFT, crypto block, all the spaces on that side, because that kind of throws a lot of security researchers off, I think it does the same thing for the researchers looking at a bug bounty for a company. They're not necessarily going to go directly to a bug bounty if you do specific NFT or blockchain research, or you're looking for bugs on smart contracts. Those are going to be things that you know the company, you know the code, you've seen a project happening. I think if you have a specific bug bounty around the Web3 stuff, then that's going to attract more people that know what they're doing in order to look at that. If you lump that in with the other bug bounties, you tend to end up with just the traditional researchers. Maybe they'll take a crack at it, maybe they're good at it, maybe they're not. But I think you're missing a portion of the population that really does know what they're doing, and that's it's a very different kind of nuance to some of the ways that smart contracts work and getting up to speed to find some of those bugs. And I think that kind of, if you have them separate, it allows both sides to get to that bug bounty. Whereas if you put it in one, I think it lumps out some of the researchers that may be it may get lost in some of the noise for some of the other projects, especially with some of the bigger projects.
I can see, I can see that in the sense of you want to find your audience that's not just going to say you're missing your DMARC configuration on your cryptocurrency's email address, or here's the boring cross-site scripting, or you have an autocomplete set on your password field, which who cares? There's no big deal there. What I hear you describing, Tyler, is you want the people who have that financial background to understand what is this contract doing, so they can also read Solidity, but also say, we can drive do some price manipulation here, or they have some context that says, oh, you're trying to bridge two blockchains? Let me show you how much money is going to be lost by doing this. And as well as doing a lot of the signatures. What was this signed? How can I trick you into signing? Or was this signed with a zero, which means anything can be signed. So I guess what I'm trying to lean into there is the context of the crypto space is definitely different from the OAuth top 10. And I will, go ahead.
High fidelity, high quality return on investment, I think breaking that out potentially. I don't think that is always the case, but I think there is that potential. And with crypto, you also have the monetary side of this that is almost always a high dollar, high issue. Like you make a mistake on a smart contract, that's going to cost you money. I mean, you look at one of your other stories about the 250 or 235,000 in 3 hours, right, from the BGP stuff. The monetary loss is almost always a direct correlation. So you can see that return on investment from a bug bounty that can be tied to monetary things much easier if you break that out.
Yes, my joke was going to be that everything blockchain is a self-funding bug bounty anyway. Just if you find the flaw, just run the flaw and take the money and wait for the company to say, oh, will you politely return it to us and we'll let you keep 10% of it or 50% of it, which we've seen several news stories just like that. But
which is a good deal. It's hard to flush money. I'm telling you, it's not that easy.
We will be talking more about this in October. So here's a prelude to some upcoming ASW episodes. So stick around, listeners. But you did mention, Tyler, the other article that John grabbed here about BGP, which yes, it speaks to me because hey, BGP, here's a protocol vault, which BGP is a protocol that has no real authentication. It has some integrity checking on it based on MD5 because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that seemed to be okay. And but we live in the age of 2022. And what was this? 3 hours and $250,000? What more fun can be had in this article here, John?
So yeah, we've had Mudge in the news recently, and yeah, Mudge, 20, 25 years ago went out and said that, someone can basically did what happened here, but in a much larger context and owned the internet. And we were all we didn't shrug. Many of us knew, but nothing really happened, right? The thing is, we were talking in the last half segment about the security jocks, I said, and the quarterbacks and that type of thing. And security has our own little sort of bubble, but the networking world is sort of like that too. Getting those folks to, the quickest way, the quickest joke around it is like IPv6. It's still, it's been coming for about 20 years. It's the networking version of Linux on a desktop. But to bring it back to here, so what actually happened is someone planned out this attack. It was sort of nicely planned. They found.
I'm surprised they didn't make more money for as nicely planned as this was, right? Like this, I would be very disappointed if I was the one that did this. This is a nice attack, honestly, in multiple aspects.
Yeah, you don't get to pull this off very often. You're right. So they found an ISP in UK, right, where they could go through and basically modify the router's announcements to say that it was announcing a /24 255 IPs for Amazon, which just happens to be on I'm forgetting it, but one of the crypto networks used it for their.
I think it was one of the bridges.
Thank you. Yeah. But so what they did is they diverted. They added an announcement. They didn't completely hijack the block. They just added a hop on a route in there, so it would go through their systems, and then they would take the traffic, and they swindled out, as we were saying, $250,000 in about 3 hours. Excuse me. The interesting part also is like, why did it take Amazon 3 hours to respond to this? The alarm should have been ringing loudly on that one in particular. But to bring it back to talking about here is whereas 20, 25 years ago, a BGP attack wasn't, it was a big deal. And like there's lots of denial of service attacks and things like that we've seen. But this is actually now becoming very, very easy and very quick to become a monetary windfall, depending on which side of that coin you're on. But so yeah, as Tyler was saying, it's these things are becoming more and more direct monetary results out of them as people execute these hacks.
Yeah, it was a good demonstration of the report from Trail of Bits that we covered maybe a month or two ago when they were talking about the centralization of a lot of these distributed networks into just what I think it was only 4 or so ASNs and whatnot. So there's some very specific ISPs, ASNs you could target to pull off these types of attacks. And now we've seen that in practice.
Yeah, BGP is one of those scary kind of dirty secrets of how fragile the internet can be. And I still don't think we have a good grasp on BGP, even from a security standpoint. There's not as many of us that remember how BGP works, for one. For two, how to actually go about securing it, which is not really that trivial. Yeah. And then we start to decentralize a lot of things and centrally rely on what happens when one of these companies does go rogue or they get breached and something happens and that BGP, those announcements go out. You fluctuate something very specific. Like, again, you can see huge monetary loss, denial of service. You can even see political things coming into play for this if the tides ended up hitting, right? So we really have to kind of get back to the fundamentals of not centralizing that internet quite so much and figuring out ways to rely on things, or at least have backup plans to mitigate some of these, because this is a 25-year-old bug similar to one of our other stories that just should not be an issue, but has huge ramifications in today's markets.
Indeed. And before we get to that other really old vuln, John, what if we just rewrote BGP in Rust? Problem solved?
Problem solved. 100%.
Okay, excellent.
Hey, we're doing good with the segues here today.
Sorry, Tyler. We lost.
We'll hop over to that. We've got segue overload. How about that? Article in the news stack. They're previewing the upcoming P99 conference, which is focused around uptime and availability and things like that. But two of the talks there are actually focused around either why I rewrote my app in Rust or the results of rewriting my app in Rust. So an interesting look at, seeing some performance increases. I don't think there was mention of security in here. You can sort of hint at security improvements, but reading between the lines. They've got one of the talks is in a YouTube video on the page. So, those who want to go and do a little more watching without going to the conference, they'll get in. But yeah, we've been talking about Rust in many different ways, and I just saw Liz Rice is going to be there. Cool. But anyways, it's, we've been talking about Rust in a lot of different ways. We've been talking about rewrites in different ways. So this sort of brought those two together, and I thought it'd be worth a few seconds.
Yeah, it's good. And also, I'll just throw into that too. I didn't link to it because it was just a tweet, but I think it was Microsoft CTO, Mark Russinovich, well known in the tool space, also going back at least 25 years, if not longer, in Microsoft tooling. I said, why are we still writing C, C++? Just start writing in Rust, which I think might make sense if you insert start writing a program. But if we look at something like Linux kernel, you're not going to rewrite that into Rust. There's no way. It's a few million lines of code, but they are taking those steps into saying, hey, there's an attack surface in device drivers, and that's an area that's prolifically exploited. So that would be possibly a good place where we can reduce that attack surface and actually address some of the memory issues there. Tyler, is this making your job easier or harder, or do you not even care?
Honestly, I don't really care.
Nice.
I think it is hilarious that they're pushing this. Like a few of the comments where soon as device drivers are supported in Rust within the kernel natively, or as soon as Mark rewrites sysinternals natively for
Right.
Rust from the beginning, then we'll all move. But I think it is a good point. I think it does hit on our last segment quite a bit, where we can get developers into this without having to think so much about security, because some of the memory protections are put in place, some of the security aspects are there. However, I don't know if that's always a great idea, because then they don't actually learn what some of those security implications are, and there's going to be bugs in Rust eventually. There are things that are going to happen. Maybe not some of the same things, but we're going to make some of those same mistakes. So from an offensive standpoint, like the code itself, yeah, it does start to provide a few of the, I'm not going to be buffer overflowing a bunch of Rust applications. However, I can write my offensive tools in Rust and have them natively deploy across multiple things without getting caught, because, hey, I've got great obfuscation and security built in as well. So there's a double-edged sword there where you have to kind of think of, what are you actually gaining from this, and is that worth the cost of redoing something? Whereas you start to rewrite something, you're doing it from the beginning, great. Pick a security language that's going to provide some options for you.
Yeah, you hit it right there, saying cost. Last week we mentioned from one of the stories how to turn money into security, and that was actually Rust investing in a security team. That's what they're trying to do. But to this point, we've got to talk about it now. You've mentioned path traversal. We've alluded to old 15-year-old vulns. And we've also picked on, one of the reasons I love path traversal is that in the past, over the summer, I've pulled out a few path traversal bugs from Golang. So to your point, Tyler, we can have memory safe languages that are path unsafe. I need to come up with a better phrase there, but there's still plenty of other flaws. And in this case, the flaw was in Python, in the tar, their tar file module. And what's neat about this, at least to me, I will use the word neat, is that it is cross-platform because it's in Python. So you can just do your ... slashes in Mac, Linux, Windows, etc. And it's been around for 15 years and nobody's bothered to fix it, or it's taken a while to find it. That's just
The
Long
scary part
sigh.
is we don't have SBOMs, right? We don't have SBOMs for libraries, for a lot of these open source libraries, and like the projects that this may or may not be within, applications this may or may not be within. Like, this is when we start to really think about the cost and security implications of different libraries and things that we rely on as programmers, in, especially at high level languages where you've got the ability to bring in these libraries. This happens, and your code that may be deployed in an unchangeable environment, something like ICS, or on devices that are not going to get an update. This becomes a pretty severe issue. So really thinking about how this affects you, and going back and trying to figure out without an SBOM all the places that this is. I'm going to have fun searching for this for a little while, I think.
Yes, it's unfortunate to look at these and see, with open source and many eyes, lots of bugs still are not very shallow. They're sticking around there. But on the other hand, you have something like Oracle Cloud and the Wiz folks who come by with just a handful of eyes. And listeners, if you're just listening and you don't have the video going, both John and Tyler just made, their expressions just now were the OMG emoji in human form. And so I'm going to set this up, and I can see you both wanting to chomp at the bit about this dead simple vuln that was an authorization bypass. Race condition. Who wants to go for it first? John, Tyler, you're on.
Well, I'm glad to see it's a different cloud provider for a change.
Fair point.
The guys at Wiz, I finally know some folks over there, and I'm like, wow, you guys keep killing it. It's so for folks who haven't looked at this, the overview of in a modern cloud, any cloud, imagine you've got a virtual machine and you want to mount a disk, usually called volumes, right? So you send the API command to be able to access that before you can mount it. And usually you'd think that has some type of authentication on there because it's your disk with your data on it that hopefully is encrypted with your keys, or at least a key. The authentication part here, if that little thing wasn't really happening, so it turns out you could go and I could mount, Mike's drives or Tyler's volumes and get all this crypto stuff. Sort of amazing this wasn't caught a little earlier. I mean, God knows this might be a recent change. But someone on the Twitters was saying, I wonder if anyone's actually exploited this. I can't imagine no one has had some fun with this by now. But I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, this gets really scary. You start to think about, and the more that we begin to rely on cloud native applications, anything cloud, your entire infrastructure being a hybrid environment, and the sensitive data that lives there. This is not just this particular instance. It's called Attach Me, is a Oracle specific one, but this could be with inside of any cloud, any tenancy. Like, there are these bugs that happen. So you just have to start to really think about, what does tenancy mean, and what does cross tenancy vulnerabilities, like how do I mitigate that risk when I evaluate going to the cloud? And sometimes you can't. That is relying on the code of a company, a cloud provider, not just a cloud provider. You take that one layer lower, and Paul would love this. You start to think about a hypervisor, IPMI issues, or chipset firmware vulnerability, all those things that the hypervisor and cloud providers actually run on. You're trusting cloud providers' hardware, cloud providers' software, and their ability to code securely. So you have to evaluate that from a risk standpoint when you're looking at some of these cloud deployments, hence why we even have Gov clouds that are entirely separate, which may or may not be separate. And you start to think about the cross-tenancy issues there, and backplanes and racks and all the hardware. Like this, these things have to be considered from a risk standpoint. This one terrifies me because it was pretty straightforward, honestly. Looking at the code, it's not overly complicated. And if someone hasn't abused this or seen this, or it wasn't deployed on purpose, like, I would be very, very surprised. And it makes me want to go look at this code and look at other tenants and cloud providers and make sure they're doing their stuff right.
Yeah, and there's an aspect. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, real quick, 1 or 2 things. I guess the actual mitigation on this is to encrypt your stuff, right? I can't remember. I'm more familiar with Amazon. I just got my Oracle account last week before this happened. But if it's not encrypted by default, encrypt. Even if you're using the default keys to the provider and you don't want to deal with the keys, at least do that. Those keys should not be shared across tenants. That'd be another fun one to test. But soapbox for a tiny second, the cloud providers have started over the last, 3-4 years using the concept of shared responsibility, which never really sat well with me. I
You
expect,
mean shared liability?
yeah, that's
Shared
great. Shared
doom,
liability is what it
shared
is.
fate. Yes.
But they, if, and I get it, they're doing a ton of stuff. All these guys, like, I mean, you start thinking about just, I don't know, even pick Oracle. How do they do, how do they scale like their message bus on the back end? Even just think about that for a small cloud provider like Oracle. Not alone the big guys, like how, so there's lots of moving parts. I get it, but they have to be perfect, unfortunately. Close to perfect isn't good enough, especially like if, data being lost like this, or not lost, stolen.
Yeah, and there, I did want to touch on that sort of shared fate, shared doom of this responsibility model. But the other aspect here too is that yes, the Wiz reached out to Oracle within 24 hours. This was fixed, and quote, no customer action was required. But we need to pause there because yes, we're going into that scary, spooky season of October, my favorite time, if you couldn't tell. But how do I know I shouldn't be worried? This speaks to a little bit of that aspect of, great, I didn't have to do anything, but was I even aware of that this was an issue? How would I know? How can I ask the question, well, were any of my drive volumes attached to someone else? Did Tyler come and
Was
poke through
Oracle
them?
there?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is the window of exposure? Was I exposed? And can Oracle state with confidence, and we can have differing degrees of trust in statements, of course, but say we had logs that could identify this access, or in fact, we didn't have observability in this area and we don't know. And that angle of observability is an area I'd throw in here that falls, unfortunately, squarely on the cloud service provider, because I don't know as as an application owner, how you would even figure out, oh, somebody popped a cross-tenant vulnerability and got to my data, because you're not really supposed to have that type of insight.
Yeah,
And maybe even if you had advanced logging set up, that's a pretty small subset of people, and you may not have the indicators or the logs that's going to be, like you said, coming from a cross-tenancy mount. That may not actually drop into your logging side. So what they did not say, I think, spoke more than what they did say. This was terrifying, but there was a very clear, very blatant, undisclosed, unsaid, like no customer data was lost, no logs were evaluated. They didn't say anything, which means that there is ongoing investigation, and there is going to be hopefully some disclosure of some sort in the future. But by not saying anything, it is pretty clear that they're saying they're looking at that.
Yeah. Sort of like people don't realize how bad this is. Like people don't realize how many Children of the Corn or Hellraiser sequels there have been. So that's my that's my horror movie metaphor for this. But moving on, because we got just a couple minutes and I got a couple more articles to hit. PlayStation 4, a researcher found a vuln, I think a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, and found the vuln again in the PS5. And to me, this stood out as a theme of testing. Now, Tyler, John, and I have been talking with each other, talking with a bunch of guests about testing. In this case, just unit testing, functional tests. What do good tests look like? And to me, this really feels like an example of a long list of questions I want to start asking of, okay, you found this in the PS4, and you had some regression tests, hopefully something like that. Why did those not get run? Were they insufficient? Were you looking for, was the test designed just to look at a specific payload? Was it not designed to look at a behavior? And that's why it got missed here. This feels like a testing problem, that if I'm going to steal the term shared responsibility, there's a shared responsibility on your DevOps and whoever is picking up that QA role to be able to keep these types of vulns from just reappearing and having to repay the vulnerability, the bug bounty once again.
I think that speaks a lot to the push for timelines, right? You've got a product, you've got a lot of market hype, marketers are pushing, you've got shareholder meetings, maybe you've got profit margins that you're trying to hit numbers for a specific time. So you've got this huge push for pressure to get code and devices out. So while there would be unit testing, the level at which that unit testing may happen may be rushed. You may not have seen it. The other thing that a lot of people don't consider is, as an attacker, as an offensive person, like the level of creativity and the stupid shit we come up with sometimes that is like no developer in their right mind would have ever thought of that. In fact, probably no good sane person would have thought that's an avenue to go after. And it's usually that attacker mindset that kind of finds those weird, interesting angles. You think a little bit differently.
Yeah.
You come up with very creative aspects that, very motivated people that would like to jailbreak their stuff will find intuitive and creative ways to get to that goal. And so there's a lot of things that you just can't unit test for, which is why there's still a need for that offensive test. There's still a need for the bug bounties. There's still a need for all those things that creative people that are going to get missed with inside of your production and CDSC pipeline. All that stuff is going to happen after the fact in some cases.
Yeah, and the Wiz folks are another example of just creative thinking about, wow, that Oracle Vault we just touched on, and then a bunch of the other Azure Vaults that we've covered over the summer. Those all have been like, oh, wow, how come nobody thought of that? Or how come nobody looked at that in more detail? Another, maybe I'm going to try and squeeze this in real quick. There's a prototype pollution bug in Chromium. And this falls into one of those categories of, sure, I understand prototype pollution, JavaScript, a prototype-oriented language where you can change the prototype for a function, prototype for a method, and suddenly every single object is going to inherit that. And it's a good way to sort of backdoor the language, or a JavaScript implementation, if you will. And as a countermeasure, ECMAScript, for those who love standards, came out with the idea of freezing an object to prevent these types of attacks. But where I'm saying that I have that whole preamble because prototype pollution also feels like one of those areas that is a vulnerability in theory. Yes, it can happen, but does it ever get used in the real world? Is it ever really necessary? And this particular discussion thread with the Chrome folks and their sanitizer kind of touched on that in this case, prototype pollution was working, honestly, as intended. This is what the spec says. And they did find a small unexpected behavior within SVG. So there was a bug here that the bug reporter got a bounty for. But it wasn't really related to the sanitization bypass. It wasn't really related to prototype pollution. So it's one of those things when we talk about education and what should we teach, should we even bother with prototype pollution or JavaScript in general? I had to
think you have to.
Right. You have to.
JavaScript in general is a nightmare. Like just having done some stuff this week, it is like, I don't know how anybody is evaluating anything with inside JavaScript that your browser's running and pulling from external sources. Like it is just a nightmare to get through. And honestly, from a library standpoint, you just look at what's being pulled in, the diff in a library from what someone pulled in and what someone's loading that has the same name, all the same functions, and just has a small nuance in code here and there. Like that JavaScript is terrifying. And we're loading millions and millions of lines of code in that JavaScript every day. Like it is, I don't know how we ever get a handle on JavaScript.
Well, don't worry, Tyler, because the Solidity folks took a peek at JavaScript and said, "Oh, this is a pretty good design. We're going to replicate this in Solidity and build some a couple $100 million or so of transactions on top of it."
What? Okay, that's horrible. That's a bad idea. That's a really good idea for me. I think I might have to go look at that.
Indeed. And so perhaps that's a good way I possibly set this up in the sense of maybe a final article, why security products fail. And now this is a bit older. It's from the end of August, but I wanted to squeeze this in because I think in the last segment we were talking with Janet about the lack of good or pervasive security education within universities, and honestly, perhaps even within industry. And this is a good reason for the security industry, AppSec industry, to look at itself and say, what could we be doing better? Are we failing? And yes, indeed, there's also perhaps a lot of security products out there that aren't delivering value, will be the term I use. And I just thought this was possibly something that might bring out some opinions from John at the very least.
I mean, that's been sort of what I've been living over the last year. We specifically are trying to build a product for non-security people. Mm-hmm. So it literally is everything as we sort of go through this list that he's talking about is what we're trying to do. Like, how do we improve user experience? We're not developing it for security people. We're developing for non-security people. How do you measure that? How do you see that people are actually, how can we see, are they actually excited or using it or completing what they're trying to do? So yeah, it's near and dear to my heart. I think it's a massive problem, and we've talked about this on the show even before the last year, before I was doing the startup. But it's there's a massive problem in particularly enterprise security, where we're creating these products which are, they have to have a security expert or the quarterback, as we go back to our last segment again. And it's just like have you tried to use that product you just wrote? It's like, it's horrible. It's like, even if you teach me how to use it, like the output of it is also horrible. And it's I don't know.
Yes.
Security people developing security tools for non-security people. Like, I mean, you can, from a logic standpoint, you already see issues here. And not only that, but how do you sell that to non-security people? I think that's the other part, like getting that user adoption, not just by the people that are going to use it, but getting that user adoption, showing the return on investment, quantifying the value to the business and the enterprise, to your upper management, your executives, so that you actually have a budget, a line item, a purchase, and you get a champion from the top down as well as the bottom up, the people using it. That's how you create a successful product. And frankly, we just don't see that in many of the security products.
Well, part of the trick there that we figured out is you don't sell it as a security tool. And this comes back again, previous segment we were talking about, like, how do we get people excited about this type of thing? I don't want to go to someone and say, hey, I'm here from security, I'm here to help, right? That just, you're going to kick me out the door. But if we can say, hey, this helps business, or this allows you to, do better marketing or have some other sort of aspect on it, that seems to have, as you're saying, a little bit better purchase. But that's sort of the thing, is how do we, not just us, but how does, as an industry, we get others thinking about this? Because, it's pretty obvious that people will do the absolute minimum when it comes to security so they can get back to selling, because that's what their goal in life is. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've moved on, at least, well, fingers crossed, I'm the optimist here, that we moved on from nobody ever got fired for, buying IBM or buying Oracle. And now we, as a security industry, we see the discussion out of the White House, out of the CISA, NSA, saying, we need SBOMs, we need supply chain. And sure, hopefully that's not setting up the idea that nobody ever got fired for buying a supply chain security tool. Hopefully, we're actually building supply chain security tools that aren't introducing toil, to use the language from this article, and we're not introducing tools that don't have attention to that user experience, which is once again repeating what John's perhaps said more eloquently. So, John, any final comments you want to add here to take us out of for this out of September of this episode, and we're going into
October. It's the end of September. It's crazy. There's one more article we have in there. I just want to give it 10 seconds. And I found this, I don't know how it got to me, but it's on eFinancial Careers. So it's a website for people looking for finance jobs. And I don't know, Google floated up to me somehow. But it's talking indirectly about the languages that various large financial companies use. So Goldman Sachs is using slang, Morgan Stanley using A+. There's rumors that Bridgewater has some sort of language of their own. And then J Street is hiring, they're hiring again, at this point of the article, a few of the sort of key contributors to OCaml. And I just thought it was sort of interesting that there's, it's not a small niche, it's a pretty damn large niche of industry that they've decided, Go, Rust, C, no, we're not going to use those, we're going to come up with our own languages. So, okay.
Do you think that's a better way for a lot of those markets to go? Is there advantages to doing that? I mean, other than nichifying your pool to pull talent from, but also having a corner market on that talent.
Yeah, you've probably got their own teaching or their own education programs. But I'm guessing if you know what you're trying to do, right, there's a very specific set of functionality you need in language. Maybe it allows them to be more efficient. I don't know.
Time to pull out the COBOL Pascal.
Yeah, somebody likes parentheses with OCaml. There's Facebook a couple years ago released an open source tool called PIFF, PFFF, that was a static analyzer that was written in OCaml. And I took a month of learning OCaml, trying to learn, and to extend it into, go find some PHP patterns. And it was great because you could build an AST, you could walk the AST, find some anti-patterns, find some vulnerable patterns. But wow, there's a learning curve to getting to OCaml for sure, if you're coming from something like a C++, let alone a PHP or a JavaScript background. So it's very interesting that in the last segment, we briefly did mention languages, but languages choice didn't seem to be the important part of security, but language choice, perhaps I think you're highlighting here, is an important part of engineering, though. Who knows it? What benefits does this language have that it will give you for your domain space of what you're building, rather than just we don't care about it from a security perspective. Well, I think that we'll maybe use that as our chance to end the segment. I want to say thank you to John. Tyler, though, you've joined us. We haven't seen you in a while. Any parting words? Any thing you want to highlight for our listeners?
No, keep up the good work. We need much more of the application security people, because I don't like to do it, and most of us don't like to do it. So we need you guys. That, or just write secure code, and we can all just be out of a job. I'm good with it.
There we go. Yeah, send us out of a job. We won't mind. So thank you, Tyler. Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Please subscribe. Do hit that like button. Check out the show notes. And we'll see you next week in October for Application Security Weekly.